Thank you all for being here. My name is Mo, and I want to welcome you all here on behalf of the Seattle Times and the Education Lab team. I'm going to thank a few people first, explain to you all how the night is going to go, and then introduce our wonderful MC. For those of you who aren't familiar with Education Lab, we're a team of reporters and editors at the Seattle Times focused on in-depth reporting about schools and learning. Specifically, the public education system in Washington and solutions to its most persistent problems. This is the fourth year we've hosted a storytelling event like this one, and we're once again impressed by all the great submissions. Many more than we could fit into one evening, but we're very proud to present 11 of the best ones to you tonight. So here's how the night will work. Each speaker will have 5 minutes to give their talk. They'll have 20 slides timed for 15 seconds each. If that sounds daunting to you, that's because it is. But they've been practicing very hard. None of them are professional speakers, and they're all a little nervous, but they're excited to share their stories with you. And now I'm very pleased to present to you our MC for the evening, Nathan Gibbs Bowling. In his 13th year of teaching, Nate is a veteran of the United States Air Force Reserves and a graduate of the Evergreen State College. He was the 2016 Washington State Teacher of the Year and one of 4 finalists for the 2016 National Teacher of the Year. He currently teaches AP Human Geography and AP Government and Politics at Abraham Lincoln High School in Tacoma, and he hosts a great bi-weekly podcast called The Nerd Farmer. You should all subscribe to it. We're very honored to have him with us this evening, so please help me give him a warm welcome.
So we've got a solid evening prepared for you all tonight. I have to say, I went to the prep session they had this weekend, and these stories that we're gonna hear are gonna be really amazing. There's stories about hard issues, tough issues. You're gonna laugh, you're gonna cry, you're gonna be moved. I just wanna thank you all for being here tonight. Our first speaker coming up is gonna be Imani Razat, and she's talking about turning a class clown into a class author.
I believe that children come to us with unique gifts. Orion is gifted with creativity and a great sense of humor. From the time that he learned how to walk and talk and text, he was looking for creative ways to make his community laugh. So I sent this child off to kindergarten with my fingers crossed, and it went well. About 2 weeks in, the teacher came to me and said, "He's quite funny." I said, "Mm-hmm." She said, "Don't worry, he's cracking us up during rug time." So that was great. And kindergarten's fun. We get to play and have fun. Second grade was a bit different. If you can imagine a larger class size, 25, 30 children, all with different abilities and needs. So a joke told in this setting at the inopportune time could cause a teacher to lose control of her classroom. So we were pulled aside after school. The teacher said, "Ryan, buddy, I love you. But please, please, don't tell jokes during class." And we were pulled aside a second time. She said, "Orion, your personality is getting in the way of the classroom." I said, "Whoa, hold on a minute here. Orion, buddy, what's going on?" He looked at me and he said, "Mom, I'm bored." I figured if I'm bored, then everybody must be bored. Why not tell a joke? Make the day go by quicker, duh. So I'm like, yeah. So then we were pulled aside a third time. This time the teacher said, "Orion, I have an idea. If you promise to go home and write your jokes down in a notebook. I promise you, buddy, I will let you share those jokes with the class. This was brilliant. Orion was inspired. He began writing jokes about science and math and what he'd learned in school that day. How does a goldfish learn to count? It joins a school of fish. He couldn't stop writing jokes. And 100+ jokes later, he had a manuscript, like a real body of work. Now, this could have gone very differently. As a parent, I could have taken that child home and chastised the funny right out of him. How does a robot eat pizza? It takes megabytes. And as a teacher, she could have done the same. Sent him to the office, labeled him a problem, stuck him in the corner. Instead, what kind of dog likes science? A Labrador. She created boundaries and a safe place for him to share his talents and gifts with the class. What did the mouse look for on the lever? A fulcrum. Now, Orion, would you like to come up and say a quick hello to everyone? Orion asked. Why can't a hand be 12 inches?
Hi, everyone. I hope you're having a good time tonight. Wait, what do I do now? Should I? Oh, okay. Why can't a hand be 12 inches. It went away.
Why can't a hand be 12 inches, Ryan?
Because then it would be a foot.
Thank you.
We're all going to work for Orion one day. So next up, we have Shannon Hitch with her talk, Side by Side, Working with Families in Special Education.
That's a hard one to follow. Okay. When my son was 2 years old, he wasn't talking. So I took him into a speech therapist who'd been recommended to me, and she spent a little bit of time with him, gave him an evaluation, and then sat down with me and said, "Your child has autism." And I stopped breathing. I thought to myself, 1 hour and one practitioner, and you've just made me question everything I know about my child. It was hard because I worked in the field of education. I knew autism, and I knew my funny little boy, and I knew there was no way he had autism, but in that moment, she made me question myself and him. I went to school because I loved working with children, and I loved teaching, and I loved psychology, so I found a career that allowed me to do both, which was school psychology. I took a variety of classes. I took classes in assessment and consultation and counseling, but by far and away, my favorite class was intellectual assessment. In that class, we learned how to give an IQ test. We actually had to find volunteers. And I'm sad to say I know the IQ of everybody in my family, including my husband. But the focus was on the test itself and on the scores, not on the implications. So I went to work in a preschool program, and one day I evaluated a little one who was demonstrating developmental delays. And after I evaluated that little one with one of my IQ tests, I sat down with her parents, and I went through a litany of everything she could not do. It was a litany of her failures. And at the end of the conversation, I actually said, "I believe your child has mental retardation." I went on to say that that child most likely would need support for the rest of their lives and probably would need all kinds of specialized instruction. That child was 3. And in that moment, I shattered that family. And I forever altered their perspective on their child, on the educational system, and on her future. So I had a speech therapist sitting with me in that meeting, and she took me aside after that, took me into her office, closed the door, and I had the biggest come to Jesus conversation I have ever experienced in my life. And she said to me, "Who do you think you are?" And in that moment, my perspective shifted. Now, I wish I could say I was wonderful with parents after that, but it was a slow journey. And it wasn't until I had my own child and we went through our experiences that the puzzle pieces slowly started to come together. And I understood the power that a practitioner has, the power to make parents question themselves and their child. And I learned that while I love to work with students, it's more important that I work with families. And I help them recognize a child's strengths and abilities and all that they can accomplish in the world. I went on to work in the secondary level. I went into middle schools and high schools, and my journey with families continued. And what I found in that secondary setting was that while I thought parents needed support at early childhood, parents of children with disabilities actually are at their most vulnerable when they are older adolescents, because we walk together through issues of mental health, suicide issues, residential placements, a wide variety of concerns. But I was able to watch so many parents really show the love for their child and learn to flourish, and they became advocates. Some became attorneys, some became educators. And I got to see the joy of all that children can accomplish, graduations and their first jobs, and all the dreams that they might have hoped for in terms of reaching their lifelong goals. Because really, it's not about disability. It's not about what a child cannot do. It's about what a child can do. And it's our responsibility to recognize all that they are capable of and capitalize on it. And what I also learned was that I can't walk in front of parents. They are their child's first and forever teacher. And we can only make it if we're walking side by side in this process.
Okay, got it. So next up, we're going to have a talk from Jillian Elliott, and she's going to talk about Beware of the Cliff.
There are over 9 million adults living in this country that have ADHD. So chances are you've come across one of them at work, maybe they're your friend, maybe it's someone in your family. I have been living with ADHD for the past 24 years, and I can certainly tell you it has not been an easy journey. I did not know the impact it was going to have on me every single day. Literally had no idea. And it's very much like falling down the stairs. This is what my brain looks like. Honestly, after 24 years, it hasn't gotten any easier to navigate. In fact, sometimes it's even harder. Harder to pay attention, harder to focus. That being said, academics wasn't really an issue for me. I really liked school, I liked learning, and I made the honor roll twice when I was in high school, and I graduated from the University of British Columbia. All I ever wanted was to fit in. And when I would hear my peers use words like annoying, crazy, loud, weird to describe me, it was pretty devastating. And I ultimately believed that they were all true. I participated in a lot of activities, Girl Scouts, marching band, I joined a sorority, but I never really felt like I belonged there. I was just kind of that extra body. As I began my career change into teaching, I realized that the one skill I never learned was how to advocate for myself. I didn't know how to ask for help or even when to recognize that I needed help. This became a real problem when I entered the workforce because I couldn't prioritize what I needed to do. And by the time I got my ego and my pride out of the way and admitted I needed help, it was way too late. And I was just like Thelma and Louise driving over that cliff in the blue T-Bird. And I didn't even know that cliff was coming, and there was no way I could stop myself from driving over it. No matter what I did, no matter who I asked, it wasn't gonna happen. Because self-advocacy was something that I still struggle with even today, I let my ADHD take control of my life. And it has cost me my job on multiple occasions, my relationships, and even my self-esteem. Students have a really hard time asking for help anyway. And when they do ask for help, they don't know what kind of help they need. And as a teacher, it's very frustrating to watch your students struggle and not be able to vocalize it. We can talk with our students about depression, anxiety, even suicide, but we can't talk to them about ADHD. If we can talk openly about ADHD, we can save our students a lot of pain and shame. I have a really hard time accepting compliments. When somebody gives me a compliment, I get very uncomfortable. And that gives me anxiety. And I have to rely on self-deprecating humor and put myself down in order to make myself feel better and less uncomfortable. It makes others uncomfortable. One of the things I want my students to take away from my teaching is I want them to make mistakes. I want them to see the benefits that they're going to get overall from that mistake. I never want them to stop making mistakes. Because if they stop making mistakes, they're not going to keep going. They're going to give up. And I don't want my students to give up. I also want my students to be able to look past what a person has, because everyone has something. And I want them to see the whole person. I was always that kid in class that never got picked for group projects, always sat by themselves. And I don't want my students to feel that way. One of the best pieces of advice a teacher gave me was always smile and say hello to people, because you never know what they're going through, and you could be brightening up their day. I have come to accept the fact that yes, I have ADHD, but it doesn't define me any more than my blonde hair and my blue eyes define me. And sure, I might be loud and crazy to some, but that's okay, because I know who I am, and those closest to me know who I am, in spite of my ADHD. So thank you for listening.
So teachers are natural communicators, and our next speaker, Ryan Healy, is one of those people who, like, if you meet him once and see him like 2 years later, you're like, I remember you. Funny interaction today when I came in. I was like, Ryan, how are you? He's like, I'm sick and I shouldn't have went to school today, which is pretty par for the course for a teacher. So our next speaker, Ryan Healy, with the talk, Can I See You After Class?
We need to talk. A phrase full of impending doom in any relationship. Can I see you in my office, please? A phrase that induces fear at what your boss might need to tell you. I think there are lots of different phrases that have very, very specific connotations, and I think at school there are some phrases that we don't talk enough about. And so I'd like to talk about one of those tonight. And to do that, I'm going to use my best teacher voice. Can I see you after class, please? This phrase is said in schools across the state and across the country every single day. It's a phrase that is wrapped up in doubt and worry for students because it is usually the precursor to a potentially contentious and difficult conversation. Recently, thanks to one of my wonderful former students, I've been reflecting on how I use this phrase and other phrases in my classroom. Recently, I was lucky enough to meet one of my former students for coffee. And we hadn't seen each other in a while, and so our conversation took us in a variety of different directions. But at one point during the conversation, she reminded me of a time I had asked her to stay after class way back in 7th grade. When she said that, I searched my memory banks, and I could not remember that. And in fact, I think I said, with surprise in my voice, "Why did I ask you to stay after? You were an incredible student. You couldn't have possibly been in trouble." And she said, "Well, I wasn't, but I thought I might be." And she said, "But when I got to your desk, you said you thought I would be the perfect person to be involved in our school's student leadership program." Hearing that story from my former student was a game changer. After that meeting and some conversations that followed, I realized that I make that kind of invitation on a regular basis. An invitation that maybe got a couple things started for my student, but that she's used to turn herself into the person she is today, and get herself to the place she's at now, a place where soon she'll be the first person in her family to graduate from college, a place where she's already working in her chosen field, the healthcare field, where her clients and boss and coworkers recognize that there's something different and powerful about the way that she connects with them. And a place where she would say that the skills she learned to use to connect in 7th grade, 8th grade, and 9th grade, that she still uses those skills today, and that they help her not only in work, but in life. It is still wild to me that that conversation could help set her on that path. Now, after reflecting on all of this, I reflect a lot, I've realized a few things. Number one, that when you ask a student to stay after class, it doesn't have to be because they're doing some things wrong, but maybe because they're doing some things right. 2, that it's my job as a teacher to remove barriers for my students. And that I need to get access to these opportunities for as many kids as I can. Because although knowledge is powerful, access is power. And then there's the thing I try to remind myself the most, that the most important work we do at school is about helping students see how remarkable they are, even if they can't quite see it yet. Especially now in the world, we need to find creative ways to lift our students up when so many things and people are trying to tear them down. In order to do all of this, we're going to have to get creative with our time and thoughtful with our words when we ask students to stay after class.
All right, speaking of students, our next speaker is named Noah Matisse, and I'm really excited for this. As an AP government teacher, I am somebody who wants students to be active politically and to be engaged in politics. And Noah's a student at Summit Sierra, the first charter school in the city of I almost said Tacoma, whoops. I'm from Tacoma, in the city of Seattle in the ID, and his is the story of activism. Make some noise for Noah.
What does it mean to have a voice? Should I speak up? Should I raise my hand? Or should I sing? I've been thinking about voice a lot as a concept recently. And you see, my generation, we have all kinds of fun new terms for having a voice. We have creating space or being heard while feeling comfortable and feeling safe at the same time. But what does that all mean when it comes to creating a real definition of voice? Now, being the amazing student that I am, I went on Merriam-Webster and looked up what voice meant, which is defined as sound produced by vertebrates by means of lungs, larynx, or syrinx, or sound so produced by human beings. But I believe that voice is to have open and honest and authentic conversations, but also having an audience that's willing to listen to us and comprehend what we have to say. Now, of course, I'm speaking about this in the context of being a high school student. Most of us don't really have the right to vote yet, but what we do possess is the capacity to have true and concrete ideas of how we want to shape ourselves, the future, and the legacy of students like us. And we can see historical context and examples such as Mary Beth Tinker, who in 1969 was suspended for wearing a black armband in peaceful protests of the Vietnam War. But what she realized is that they were violating her constitutional right to the freedom of speech. So what she did was she took her case to the Supreme Court and solidified the protection of the First Amendment in public schools. And as we fast forward to my generation, we see other students such as Emma Gonzalez, who is advocating against gun violence in public schools. Seeing people who reflect my diverse background and speaking up and advocating for issues that concern students to protect us, that's what truly inspires me to take my voice and leave a positive legacy for students. Now, in 2015, I really learned what it meant to have a voice. Just a few weeks into my freshman year, after the grand opening of Seattle's first charter high school, we were ruled unconstitutional by the Washington State Supreme Court. And this is pretty blindsiding. Imagine acclimating to your school and you have to suddenly recognize we may actually be shut down. But my peers and I knew the only way we could protect our school was by using our voices. So our voices manifested for weeks and time after time, marching down to Olympia and advocating for ourselves, sharing our story and conveying our message that our voices matter, that we should have a choice in the opening of our schools and not letting somebody else who doesn't understand our experiences make that decision for us. We had to speak to legislators going door to door in the offices and having little learn-ins adapted from sit-ins and lobbying to convey our message that we should decide this. Now before this, don't get me wrong, I was a pretty silent kid. And I don't mean that in a sense of being shy or meek or a wallflower, if you may, but I didn't really speak up for things that concerned me. I spoke in confidence with people like close friends and my mom, but I didn't really have the confidence to share my voice and broadcast it. But following this experience in Olympia, I knew that I was essential to this. So now where am I? My voice translates to my weekly schedule, where in student government, I will communicate my messages to my administrators, creating proposals and revisions to really change the future experience of our school. We have a voice, and we are governing, and we are democracy, overseeing the future of our students. And on behalf of students, I ask that you all take the time to listen to us, to understand that we are critical in shaping the future of our educations. To listen to us is how we're going to define the future. Our voices matter, and as students, we matter. So please, when you hear a student raise their voice, take the time to listen, because they actually may be defining the future for themselves.
Maybe I'm just being selfish, but I want to live in the future that Noah and Orion want to create. So our next speaker is Victoria Mott. and she's a teacher at Glen, which is the only co-ed juvenile detention facility in the state of Washington. And her story is entitled, "Sometimes I Forget I'm in a Prison."
It's a sunny day, early in September. I walk into my room and look around. It looks like a classroom circa 1985. Screen, check. Desks, check. Chairs, check. Windows, blacked out. Those desks, well, they're attached to the chairs. There's no glassware, no laboratory equipment of any kind. In fact, by law, there's no anything that isn't outdated, broken, or been discarded by another school in the district. A group of teenagers rock up. Nothing unusual about that, you say. They like to travel in packs. But these arrive in a silent line. A pristine collection of sneakers files in. Clearly, my students and I share a love of shoes. I look around. It's a river of orange and yellow, punctuated by the occasional teenage uniform of sweats and t-shirt. These students, they don't come by iconic yellow buses. There are no doting parents braving the drop-off line at the end of the day. These are our incarcerated youth. Their homes are cell. Their parents optimistically rock up at the start of a shift, sometimes serving 16 hours before clocking off at the end of the day. Welcome to Glen, the only co-ed medium maximum security detention facility in the state of Washington. The path to Echo was written for many of these children before they were even born. Addiction, poverty, mental health issues. By the time they reach us, nearly every single student has a documented mental health disorder. Most of them have PTSD from trauma so horrific that those of us in this room cannot even imagine it. Thank goodness. But inside those vulnerable, broken little people is still an innate curiosity, the wonder that every child is born with. Sparking that curiosity, well, that's my job. As September rolls through, I spend it rocking up to my classroom, showing up and trying to stay calm no matter what is happening. I imagine a swan, all serene on the surface, no ruffled feathers, yet under my skin I am swimming in turbulent waters. I'm learning what to do and what not to do, when to push the panic button, when to stand back, when to send kids out, when to laugh, and when to be quiet. It's a steep learning curve. But by the end of September, I'm feeling less like an imposter and more like I belong. And my students, if they are still with me, they are testing boundaries less often, and much to my surprise, we are actually doing science most lessons every day. And whilst that feels like a success, I still have 1 or 2 students whose walls are so fortified, the most they give me each day is a gruff, "I'm not doing anything." I smile. It's become a game. Every day, I invite them to play. We're studying polymers. I hold up a Ziploc bag full of water and ask my students what will happen if I poke pencils inside it. They laugh. They tell me there's going to be a puddle of water at my feet. They invite me to do it over somebody else's head. I'm not that brave. One by one, I take my pencils and I poke it through the plastic and leave it there. Not one drop of water escapes. I look around the room. Eyes are wide, mouth slightly open. You could hear a pin drop. And then it comes, the torrent of explanations, ideas, wonderings. It's a sweet moment. But it's not the best. The best comes the next day when my most resistant student, let's call him X, comes into the room and asks me for the equipment. He tells me he wants to perform it for everybody who was absent yesterday. And believe me, there's a lot. He takes the stuff, he stands at the front of the room, and much like me the day before, he brings it out for intrigue and suspense. And at that moment, I look out of my open classroom door, and I see a prison guard, a smile creeping up on his face. He is getting so much pleasure and enjoyment from watching this kid be a success. And in these moments, I forget that we're in prison. In these moments, it's a huge reward. We could be in any classroom anywhere in the world. Maybe because it's been hard fought. Maybe because there have been many, many more scary moments than I ever signed up for. But in these moments, those butterflies have stilled. And the why behind why I teach has been reinforced by these kids once again.
We heard a lot. We heard you need to have positive conversations when you say, I need to see you after class. We heard about listening to student voice. We heard a story about teaching in prison and how teaching and learning transcends boundaries and fences and bars. We heard a lot. To start, could you each just introduce yourself and talk about your role with the team, please?
Yeah. Hello? Hey. You guys heard from me. My name is Mohammed. I'm the engagement editor for Education Lab.
Hi, I'm Joy. Joy Resmovitz. I'm the editor of Education Lab. It means I get to work with these fine people, plus one more who you'll hear about from soon, to craft how they think they can best serve our community. And I get to hire excellent people when there's positions to hire for. It's a great gig.
My name is Dahlia Bazaz, and I'm a K-12 reporter for Education Lab, mostly covering Seattle Public Schools, which has kept me very busy in the last year.
My name's Catherine Long. I'm one of the Education Lab reporters. I previously was covering higher education, and now my beat is a little broader. It includes K-12 as well.
And I just want to give a brief shout out to our other reporter, Neil Morton, who got really sick today. He is never late or misses anything, so that's how I know it's real. But he is incredible. He's an education finance wizard, and he actually enjoys it, which is weird. But yeah, shout out to Neil if you're watching at home. Get better, buddy.
Yeah, he like live tweets McCleary hearings, which is like not the business. All right, pass the mic to Joy, please. All right. So Joy, the focus for Education Lab this year is special education, but also specialized education.
Yeah.
What does that mean exactly, and why is your team pursuing that?
That's a good question. It's a term that we sort of came up with because we wanted to answer the question of what happens to the so-called problem kids. You know, a lot of the people that we've heard about today are people who didn't quite fit in that box. So what we're trying to do is interrogate the way that the school system is set up and asking, you know, who was it developed to serve, and who does it promote, and who doesn't it serve, and what happens to the kids who, you know, maybe aren't the best at sitting and listening and taking tests and reading, but might be more dexterous, and what is there for them? Where are they in the state? What are states doing for them in other places across the country? Now, a big part of that is special ed. Students with disabilities are part of the group of students who are underserved, as we heard tonight. And we are focusing on that right now because the legislature is in. Part of the mission of EdLab is to learn from other states and other places' successes so that we can bring that knowledge home. And we think that this is the right moment to focus in on these kids and ask who is doing better by them and how can we learn.
Mo, question for you. So other folks' titles up here make sense, right? So like editor, reporter. You're an engagement editor. What does that mean? What do you do?
Yeah. So it does involve explaining myself a lot. But an engagement editor, the way I look at it, is that I act as sort of the middleman or the liaison between our coverage and the public. So I try to make connections between teachers and students and parents and legislators. And I also put on events like this so we can interact with the public. You guys get to learn a little about what we do. And, you know, just spread ideas about education like the wonderful stories you're hearing tonight. But yeah, it involves some reporting and some editing and a lot of talking.
So, Dahlia, going to you, I actually want to ask you two questions. Okay. One, I want to ask you, what's the most difficult story you've reported on, and what did you learn?
Okay.
And two, I want you just to talk a little bit about your series that you've been doing on teacher diversity, because you are doing some of the best reporting in the country on that issue.
Thank you. Okay, so for the first question, I'm going to give a politician's answer and split it into 3 parts. So
Well played.
there are different categories of stories, and a lot of reporting is getting really anxious about not knowing enough about what you're writing about and freaking out and like trying to get it in on deadline. And for me, the most challenging stories, one category of that is obituaries. This is not related to education, but it is very, very nerve-wracking to write an obituary. You often don't have that much time to do it. And you're writing about someone's legacy, and it's possible that nothing else will be written about this person, or it's one of the last authoritative things that appears about this person. And you've got family members you're talking to, and you're really scared of screwing up any facts and conveying their life in an inauthentic way. So those stories are always really difficult. The second story, the second type of story that I find really challenging is anything about McCleary or school finance or anything having to do with school budgets. It's very hard. I feel like I have to relearn everything over again because it's changed a lot in Washington over the last 2 years, and we recently put out a story about special education funding, which is just 2 really complicated subjects mashed together. So that was really difficult. And then the third category, or the story that I found challenging, actually segues to your second question, which is about teacher diversity. That story was not challenging in the respect that I was super unfamiliar with the topic. I found the interviews to be very there was a lot of alignment between journalism and teaching when I did that story. There's a lot of crossover there. So there's a lack of diversity in journalism. There's also notoriously bad pay for journalists and for teachers. And so doing interviews for that was a little bit easier, and then growing up as a student of color at schools. What I found difficult about that story is I had gone into it knowing that, okay, 90% of teachers in Washington are white and almost half of students are students of color. I went in thinking that it was, or approaching the story like there were disproportionate hiring practices with districts, that it was mostly a district-wide issue. But what I learned along the way is that there are so many different places where students of color could see themselves in the teaching field, but then don't. Whether it's lack of access to higher education, whether it's lack of visibility in schools. I mean, having no teachers of color is a pretty big deterrent to not seeing yourself in that profession. And I think that visibility issue was a very intangible piece that I hadn't really thought about very much. I remember going to this conference last fall that a principal was speaking on a panel. It was about teacher diversity, and he had been trying to increase the number of black educators in Philadelphia. And so he was going around to area high schools there and meeting with some students, and he would ask a room full of students of color, so who sees himself as a teacher? And he would just get laughs in response. And you know, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, a lot of what we do at Education Lab is we cover racial injustice in schools. And so if you're disproportionately disciplined, if you're failed at a higher rate, why would you want to go back to schools and teach them? So just to give you an overview or background of the project is that we had a 3-part series. We partnered with the Columbian newspaper down in Southwest Washington, and we looked at the issue around the state. We had a great graphics / web developer, Emily Ang. She produced a map that showed the ratio of students of color to teachers of color in districts across the state. And then we looked at how districts were trying to modify their hiring processes and improve their environments for teachers of color, because they also leave at a higher rate or exit the profession at a higher rate than white teachers. So those were the things I learned there, is just that sort of intangible, or actually it's very tangible because you see it in the hiring numbers, but the visibility issue was a big one.
And then, Catherine, question for you. What are you hoping to learn this year as you cover special ed and specialized education?
Well, we've just started working on trying to understand some of the issues around special ed, and the first thing that strikes me is for a lot of parents, it seems to be a real battle between the parents and the school district for them to get the services that they believe their children need. So one of the big questions is, why is that the case? And is this a problem? Is it money? And if it's money, how much is the right amount of money for these programs, and where should it be spent? What about those parents who can't hire a lawyer and who don't have the time or the wherewithal to fight a school district for the services they think their child needs? What does this look like from a teacher's perspective? How are many of you are teachers out there? How does this look from your side of things? I'm curious to know more about these private programs that I keep hearing about from various parents and whether they work, and if they do work, why aren't those programs being taught in the public schools? And if they don't work, why is the money going for them? And I guess the last question I have, my kids went to Seattle Public Schools and they went through the general education track, and I kind of didn't know anything about the whole special education world. And I think it would be really interesting to write for parents like that, to try to help them understand what special education is all about, and why they should better understand and appreciate it, and how it can be really difficult for a child who doesn't fit into the regular classroom to get a good education.
And what I love the most about Kari is how much of an advocate she is for youth, and you're going to see that in her presentation. So, Kari O'Driscoll.
I love teenagers. I know that's not a very popular perspective, but I do. One of the things that I love most about teenagers is their ability to have a foot in both worlds, because this is really the last time in their life that they'll ever get that opportunity again. They do that thing sometimes where they just get goofy and irreverent and silly and knuckleheaded, and you can see the little kid in them, and sometimes that's annoying as an adult, but really usually it's kind of cool. And then they turn around and they say something so insightful and mature and wise, and you think, oh, wow, like I see you becoming this person you're gonna be. It's kind of cool. The other thing that I love about teenagers is their ability to sniff out BS. They know if you're lying, and they know if your heart's not in it, and they will call you on it. And I love that. But they're really, really bad at recognizing their own BS. So I was working with a group of students at the Queen Anne Recovery School, which is an alternative Seattle Public High School for kids with addiction. And we were talking about the things that stress them out the most. And one of the students looked at me and he said, you know what, it's math. I used to be really, really good at math. It was like totally easy for me in elementary and middle school, no problem. And I hit a wall, and I can't do it anymore. And I need this class to graduate, and I'm an idiot, because everybody else can do it, and I suck at this, and what is wrong with me? And I see all these other kids nodding, and it turns out they all have a story like that. There's a thing that they're beating themselves up about, that one thing that's supposed to be easy, that's not, that they, whether it's a skill they should learn or they need to learn, or it's that one conversation they can't get past with their dad. But they're coming to the conclusion that they're useless, that they're idiots, that they're the only one that can't seem to master this skill. And it kind of broke my heart, because that's BS. And so I asked him to go on this little imaginary journey with me and think back to what it was like when they were infants and they were acquiring language for the first time. Because acquiring language is one of the hardest things you can ever do, right? In order to acquire language when you have none, you need to be able to interpret tone and context and body language simultaneously. It's a really hard thing to do, okay? especially in English when someone says there. Because which there is it, right? That's really hard. And some of these kids, when they were acquiring language, were acquiring more than one language at a time. And that's a big dang deal. And here they are in this classroom with me as teenagers, all having done that, right? They're reading, they're writing, they're speaking 1, 2, sometimes 3 languages and making themselves known. So what's the difference? When they were infants, literally every other need they had was being met by someone else. They were being fed, clothed, carried from point A to point B, right? They weren't making any decisions. They were literally being taken care of. The entire bandwidth of their brain and their nervous system was available to acquire language. That's not the case anymore. These kids are in high school. They're taking 5, 6, 7 classes at a time in different subjects with 10 minutes in between. They're expected to master all of them simultaneously. These kids are dealing with severely heightened emotions. They're looking at what they're going to do when they get out of high school. They're dealing with parents. Some of them have intimate relationships. They're not sleeping. They're doing extracurricular activities. On top of all of these other things they're doing, many of them are working part or full time. They're getting themselves up, fed, dressed, to and from school, to and from work, struggling with addiction, and they're beating the crap out of themselves because they can't figure out pre-calc like everybody else in the room. Well, you know what? These kids needed a little shot of perspective. They needed to understand that the things that they're being asked to do in any given moment of any given day is enormous. And the kinder they can be to themselves, and the more often they can have that perspective that what they're doing is really friggin' amazing, the better off we're all gonna be. Thank you.
I once had a friend come from out of town, actually out of state, to visit Seattle. And he basically described Seattle as a city with the demographics of a Scandinavian country. That stuck with me because I've been in the Northwest all my life, and it's something like you don't realize when you travel, like how Nordic it is here sometimes. That's subtle. So our next speaker is named Kimberly Harden, and she's going to talk about the chilly climate sometimes that she's encountered within higher ed.
I am a Pisces. Pisces are considered to be the most caring, the most affectionate, and the most compassionate of all of the astrological signs. However, these were skills that I developed only after I became an educator. During my first year, my first quarter as a professor, a young student of color came to me and asked for a hug. Now, most Pisces would agree that we're kind, but we're also very suspicious. And so this simple gesture made me a little leery. I obliged and gave the student a hug. And during our embrace, she says, "I am so happy to finally have a Black instructor because you understand what I go through. You understand the social isolation and judgment that I feel on campus every day." What the student described is called the chilly climate effect. We're in Seattle, but it has nothing to do with weather, nor does it have to do with the phenomenon called the Seattle freeze. The chilly climate effect is basically a myriad of inequities that create a chilly or hostile classroom environment that negatively impacts women and students of color. Chilly climate effect dampens a person's self-esteem, their classroom participation, as well as their life's aspirations. I'm getting emotional because this is something that we deal with on a regular basis. People of color, particularly African American men, they have fewer job and educational opportunities. This is the result of gendered racism, which is the intersection between racism and sexism. Research shows that faculty hiring committees often overlook people with ethnic-sounding names. They typically, over 40% more, hire or recruit people with white-sounding names, whatever that means. That's a microaggression. This is something else that faculty and students of color have to contend with. Some of you may not be aware that academic bullying also occurs in higher education. Academic bullying is not physically attacking someone. It's these subtle microaggressive comments, the verbal attacks, the belittling in front of coworkers and classmates, and also ignoring someone's contribution or diminishing their contribution. Workplace bullying occurs through all working sectors at a rate of 10 to 20%. However, in higher education, that rate increases exponentially to 18 to 42%. Bullying and microaggressions work together to create the chilly climate effect. It reinforces it. It is designed to keep faculty of color and students of color out of educational settings. It really breaks my heart because I have grown men, students, males, coming to me crying, heartbroken, saying, Dr. H, I don't understand why I always have to explain my self-presentation, why I wear my hair a certain way, why I wear clothes, my outfits, and things like that. I don't understand why my intellect is always challenged. I don't understand why I receive rude stares. I don't understand why I'm excluded or asked to leave public campus spaces. What can I say to that? As a faculty member, I want to say, oh, honey, you're just making this up. I don't believe that faculty members do that or your classmates do that. But as a person of color, I know that they are speaking the truth because I still go through it myself. As an educator, as a Pisces, right, my natural tendency is to care. And it breaks my heart, and it's very disconcerting that other faculty members don't share the same opinion. So to my fellow educators out here, I'm going to challenge you to care. Care means connecting with systemically non-dominant students, becoming aware of the issues that they face, the issues that your fellow faculty members face. Retraining yourself in interpersonal communication. I'm a communications instructor, so that was a hard thing for me to say, is retrain yourself. But yes, retrain yourself in interpersonal communication. And encourage all of your students and all of your peers to reach for the sky and to really develop themselves academically, personally, and professionally. So we can show that we care by caring. Thank you.
Next up, we have a professional translator, Snchez, and his talk, From the Seed to the Fruit.
I used to work at a biotech company also in the pharmaceutical manufacturing industry many years ago, and I gave that up. I retired 3 years ago. So what I have been doing now is I have been volunteering for an organization that I had the fortune to encounter. And it was through a conversation at a poetry event. The name of the organization is PONGO Teen Writing. The work that I knew that they do at the detention center and other institutions really is what appealed to me, because I care not only for the education of others, not only for myself, but for others, especially the children. I believe that children should be exposed to other processes of education, especially those that lack the technology, art, and literature. Specifically, when we go into the detention center, what we do with the kids is we sit down on a one-on-one and we talk about the situations that may be happening at the moment. A lot of these kids end up in that situation due to their family situations or perhaps other issues that I have encountered in their lives, but mainly through broken homes. And they already come with the trauma and mental illness, drug addiction, and some other issues that they come in there. I'm also volunteering for the Writers in the School program, and when I do the comparison between the kids on the outside and the kids on the inside, both have extreme different priorities. The kids in detention, they worry about when is going to be my next visit with the judge, if their sentence is going to be reduced, and yet they have to worry about everything else that goes on in the system. It's not easy to be caged up. At times when I sit with them to write about their situation, we always end up talking about how enclosed they feel in there and how heavy there is being in that space. A lot of the kids, when we do the writing exercises, I can see that by the way they write, sometimes it's not very clear, and they have trouble thinking, trying to spell out what they are feeling at the moment. Whereas the kids on the outside, when I go to volunteer at the middle school and the high school, some of them are very willing to write, but there is also that apathy that they have in the creative process. They don't know how to process these things, perhaps because they're lazy or their priorities are other than their iPhone and the food, what they're going to have, they're going to eat, their friends. And the dynamic is so different. So I see that the need for to educate the kids, so to give them what they need, is either very linear or very variegated. I see it as a rainbow. Speaking of the rainbow, I see the photo of the kids. In the Latino communities, some of the kids had to work on the weekends or sometimes during the week to help their parents. I don't know, a lot of the Anglo communities, parents, they say that, no, we don't even ask our kids to help us out. So the work that is generated at the detention center there are gems. And I got to tell you that everybody has a bright mind, and not everybody's a diamond. So, you know, there are rocks, but there are not diamonds. Yet the effort is given in there, and the best writing that comes out is through that experience on a one-on-one. Because there are some kids that they don't have any trust in their adults in their lives. So when young kids and young boys and young ladies are praised, their faces, they gleam like the sunshine in the early spring. And despite the distractions that they may have, whether it's in school, and I tell you, in detention, they don't have a lot of that. So these days, I've been sharing fruit and shelter with other kids and teenagers through words, and they are like seeds. Someday they will germinate to create their own stories, whether in prose or poems as we create. And they're going to grow also to develop their own branches and develop their own fruit and to give to each other. But they have to be strong, first of all, like the tree we see in that photo. There are roots that they need to be exalted, and the words that we use with them are very important because they need that support. I may not be an educator, but I have something in me that I can share, and that's why I volunteer my time with them. Some of them, they have been finding their voice, and those that don't have, we help them. We try to help them out. Give a little bit of my personality, my own humanity with them, because that's the best way that I can attest that I am a human. Therefore, those words that I use with them are like the dandelions and the little fuzzies that fall, go on the breeze, like words waiting for them to enter their ears, for those who want to listen, and help them create something out of their situation, whether it's outside or on the inside. Thank you.
That last image, words are like the clothes we wear on our tongue. So our next storyteller is honestly one of the most, I'm trying to decide, fierce, ferocious, or both. I'm gonna go with one of the most fierce advocates for equity here in Seattle schools. She's currently serving as a program manager for the Ethnic Studies program, and she's the 2019 Regional Teacher of the Year. Her story is called Representation Matters, Tracy Castro-Gill.
Representation matters, not just for students, but for teachers, for families, for our country as a whole. This is my grandfather, Richard Castro. He grew up in Southern California in a Mexican-American community as a Mexican-American person when it was illegal to speak Spanish in schools. When I went to school, it was in the 1980s, and it was no longer illegal to speak Spanish in schools. But Tracy Castro, with brown skin in a Mexican-American neighborhood, didn't have access to that part of my culture. So I went on a journey trying to figure out where I fit and who I was. Most of my peers were Mexican-American, and even if they had full access to their culture, they were on the same journey as me. Most of us ended up where white supremacy told us our culture was: gangs, drugs, dropping out of school. By the time I was 19, I had 2 children. I had become a Mexican-American statistic, a teenage mom. This led into decades of poverty and domestic abuse. I was with my ex-husband for 17 years, right out of high school. Fortunately, I was able to escape that thanks to my late husband, Brian Gill. Thanks to him and all of the support he offered me, I was the first person in my family to graduate from college in 2013 from the University of Washington. That same year, I got my first teaching job in Federal Way, where I taught middle school. I realized that in this diverse community with all of these students of color in front of me, in order to be the teacher they wanted me to be and be the person I needed to be an anti-racist ethnic studies educator. My passion for racial justice led me to work with Seattle Education Association's Center for Racial Equity, and I was fortunate enough to be on the ground level of developing that center and that organization. Through that work, I met this woman, Marquita Princing. She's now the director of the Center for Racial Equity, and she has changed my life by asking me one question: how do we get more teachers to teach like you? That became my year of yeses, and I started saying yes to every single opportunity to engage in racial justice work. The Center for Racial Equity has become a safe haven for educators of color, most of us women of color, because representation matters, and we need this cohort, this community of educators of color to keep us going on this fight. Through this work, I met John Greenberg, and he invited me to help him bring ethnic studies to Seattle Public Schools. Since then, I eat, breathe, live, sleep. I probably talk in my sleep about ethnic studies. That's all I do. During this time, I also noticed, when studying the data about the disparities of students, especially when it comes to discipline and push-out rates, that the teachers doing this to our students of color weren't getting fired. So if I speak up in support of those students, I'm not going to get fired. So I started doing that. I started pushing people into uncomfortable situations. I started talking about white supremacy and racial justice. I didn't get fired. When I taught at Denny International Middle School, I started a student racial equity team, and I taught 6th graders those same concepts, and they went into their classrooms and challenged their teachers about the microaggressions they were experiencing. I didn't get fired. One student wrote to me in my yearbook, "You helped me learn who I am." Representation matters. Not only did I not get fired, my colleagues got together and helped me become the 2019 Puget Sound Educational Service District's Teacher of the Year. In addition to that, thank you. In addition to that, I got promoted. I'm no longer in the classroom. I'm now at the district level as the program manager for Seattle Public Schools Ethnic Studies program, and I work with a dedicated group of administrators of color who are just as passionate and as fierce as I am of making these systemic changes at the district level, because representation matters for administrators also. You would not believe, well, maybe some of you would, the fights that we have on this systemic level at the district office for racial justice. I'm now in a position where I can literally put representation onto the shelves of classrooms across our district. My most recent purchase was the book Teaching for Black Lives for every K-8 school in Seattle Public Schools to go on the library shelves there. Students are hungry for this information. I taught it to 6th graders, and they literally wrote me thank you cards at the end of the year for pushing their boundaries and giving them space to examine their own racial identities and racialized experiences. A Latina student wrote in an essay, "I feel like I'm welcome at school because I learned about heroes of color who made a difference, who looked like me." Representation matters. This is my tattoo. This is my life. It has become my life's work to fight for racial justice in Seattle schools. I might get fired. I don't make a lot of friends, but it's all about the representation and making sure students don't have to go on the journey I did.
The folks who aren't serving my students don't get fired. So if I go hard at them, I ain't gonna get fired too. I want that just tattooed everywhere on my forehead. All right, our final storyteller of the evening is Ricky Robertson. Ricky's an educator, an author, and consultant who focuses in helping students experiencing trauma. His story is called Broken, but also Whole.
I started teaching in New York City. My first year as a public high school teacher, my students' passing rates on state assessments increased from 55% to over 90%. And although my students were doing great, I was struggling. I was working nonstop, tutoring before school, after school, teaching Saturday school. It was hard for me as a new teacher to find balance because the need and the demands in teaching are endless. So not to mention like putting that much energy into something, I didn't even see the parts of myself that I was neglecting. So by my third year teaching, I'm in a relationship with this guy. It's a few months in. It's a pretty new relationship, but it's starting to get toxic. And I come home from work one day, and he's telling me about the different men that he's attracted to and all the reasons why I'm not enough for him. And unfortunately, it's really familiar to things that other men that I've dated in the past have said to me, but for some reason that day I decided that this pattern had to end. So even though I didn't have the communication skills to navigate a respectful breakup conversation, I said to him, thank you. I said to him, this is over and you need to leave. And it's bizarre because I can actually remember exactly where I was standing the moment I said that, because it was like there was this physiological shift in my body the moment I declared my worthiness. And although I felt empowered about breaking that cycle, I also felt afraid that I was going to be punished for it. So the next day, I go to work, I come home from work, and I notice that the door on my apartment doesn't open quite right. And I get up to my bedroom, and I see my bedroom door is been taken off the hinges, and it's leaning against the wall. And when I step inside my bedroom, I realize he has destroyed everything. My clothes, my books. He's even taken a paint marker and written different things that he hates about me on the walls of my bedroom. And he's left me a letter with just pages and pages about all the ways that I've hurt him and the ways that he hopes that I will be hurt. So obviously, it wasn't safe to spend the night in my apartment, so I went to a friend's place for the night. And I get up the next morning, I borrow an outfit for work, I call the school that I'm working at to let them know I'm going to be coming in late. And looking back, I would have taken the day off. But at the time, so much of my self-worth was connected to me being a good teacher that I didn't understand that I had to take care of myself first. So I go to work, and I worked in a building where I worked in a school that was on the 4th floor of a building. So I had to take an elevator to get up there. And I get in the elevator, and right as I'm about to press the button for the 4th floor, one of my students walks into the elevator. And it's a young man who I have put a lot of effort into working with, put a lot of effort into developing a good relationship with, and we have a relationship that has a lot of trust. In fact, he had recently shared with me prior to that day that he is sometimes late for school because he and some friends mug people on the subway in the mornings. And so I see his facial expression as he gets in the elevator because I'm standing there, and the thing about the friend that I borrowed the outfit from is that he had a smaller build than I do, so the pants were about 3 inches too short, coming above the ankle, and my buttons are all stretched out, and I'm standing there ready to teach math, even though I'm an hour and a half late for school. And he, clocks this, and he kind of, collects himself, and he says, how are you doing? I'm all right. And he says, I'm glad that you're here. Now, as a teacher, I had always hoped that I could offer some compassion or acceptance or grace to my students, but in this instance, this young man was offering that to me. And he taught me so much in that moment about the power of honoring someone's dignity by acknowledging my wholeness in a moment when I felt so broken. So about a week later, he comes up to me and he says, "What happened that morning in the elevator?" And I knew it wasn't appropriate to share the details with him, so I just said, "Somebody was really hurt and angry and took it out on my belongings." And he came to me a couple days later and he said, "I thought about what you said the other day and I want to quit doing what I do in the mornings on the subway, and I'm going to need your help to graduate." Now, that conversation was years ago, and I've since gone on to co-author a book on trauma-informed practices for schools. And I work with schools around the country on implementing systems that foster both student and educator mental health and resilience. As for that young man, he went on to graduate high school, and he now works supporting and empowering youth. And I hear from him every year on my birthday and on Father's Day. Thank you.
Thank you and good night.